So we've done quite a few videos here on the channel recently talking about Impact Wrestling, and I've really enjoyed doing that. Impact Wrestling is a company that at the moment that has so much buzz and so much positive news and momentum heading into Slammiversary next weekend. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different today. Now usually we would cover news stories about all forms of professional wrestling, right? WWE, AEW, New Japan, Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, you name it, we'll cover it. But today we're going to do something a little bit different to celebrate all of this Impact Wrestling we've been talking on the channel recently, and most importantly, to hype up the Slammiversary pay-per-view next Saturday, July 18th. We're today going to rank all of the Impact Wrestling Hall of Famers that have been announced by the company. Now, so far, as of this time of recording, there have been 9 people in total that have been inducted or announced for the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame. They consist of 6 wrestlers, 1 referee, and 1 tag team. Now, before we get into the rankings, I think it's important that I say what I'm ranking it on and what I'm judging it on. So what I'm judging it on and what I'm ranking it on here is that particular person's importance and impact, if you pardon the pun, on Impact Wrestling in general. It's obviously it factors into how long they were with the company, their achievements, etc. Lots of different factors come into this, but I think the most important thing here is to rank them in their overall contribution to Impact Wrestling too, when it comes to, said, longevity, achievements, how they elevate the company as a whole. All of that stuff will go into the rankings here. Now, also, it's important to state that, as always, this is just my opinion. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just that. It's just an opinion. That's what, to me, makes pro wrestling so great. It's what makes social media great. And most importantly, it's what makes this channel so great. It's a place where everyone can come together, share their opinions, and not have to worry about ripped apart for doing so. It's just that. It's an opinion. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just an opinion. And I hope you have fun watching the video. So let's go into our first person, ranked at number 8. It's Ken Shamrock. Now, Ken Shamrock is the latest inductee into the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame. Of course, he is a one-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, back when at the start it was NWA TNA, and the first World Champion in the promotion's history. So why is Ken Shamrock ranked as number 8 here? I think if you rank him up or you list him up against the other people that are in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame, it just, to me, it's not comparable, and that's not to diminish what Ken Shamrock has done with the company. I think it's great that he's in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame. He should be in the WWE Hall of Fame, let's be honest, right? I mean, the contributions that Ken Shamrock's done to WWE, in my opinion, far outweigh his contributions to Impact Wrestling. And it's great to see Ken Shamrock back in Impact Wrestling right now. I think their use of him has been just absolutely tremendous. He'll be competing with Sami Callihan at Slammiversary for the Impact World Championships against the North, Tag Team Championships rather, against the North. So I'm really looking forward to that one. But in terms of if you weigh him up against the other people that are in this Hall of Fame, it's not comparable, really. Yes, he was the first champion, first world champion in the promotion history, and that is obviously very important. It's important to the history of the company, and obviously when you look back at the first event, you'll always remember Ken Shamrock winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, so that is important, but he wasn't with the company for that long. You have to remember that too. That World Championship reign lasted a few weeks. They were doing weekly pay-per-views at that period of time. Obviously, it's a period of time that people look back on fondly when it comes to the initial budding days of NWA, TNA, and some of the good and some of the bad, those events. If you look back on that first show, by the way, it's an absolutely stacked show. You look at some of the names that are on there: Ken Shamrock, Jeff Jarrett, Scott Hall, AJ Styles, Jerry Lynn, etc. So it was a great show, and I think Ken Shamrock coming back to Impact Wrestling over the last year has been a really nice thing to see. It's just nice to see Ken Shamrock back in professional wrestling in general, isn't it? I was a huge fan of his in the 90s in WWE. I think his work as the world's most dangerous man in WWE, his feuds with the likes of Triple H, The Rock, most importantly, and being part of the corporation, it was great, right? But in terms of, I think if you list him and you compare him to any other names on this list, it's not really close. So Ken Shamrock is in ranked number 8. Doesn't make him any less of a person. I wouldn't, say that to his face. He'd kill me. He's still, even at 55 or 56 years old, is still the most dangerous man in the world, without a shadow of a doubt. So the one-time and the first world champion in the promotion's history, the one-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Ken Shamrock, is here at number 8. So at 7, it's EARL HEBNER, TNA senior referee from 2006 to 2017. And again, this was a difficult one. This whole list, to be honest, to put together was a really difficult one as to who is. I hate people trying to say who is better than others, because none of these people are better than others. They've all contributed to Impact Wrestling in their own way and made it into the company it is today, good, bad, or indifferent, what your opinion is. But Earl Hebner, I ranked him as number 7 purely because his longevity with Impact Wrestling was absolutely tremendous, right? And Earl Hebner, to me, is the greatest referee of all time. I know some people will have their opinions, Mike Chioda, Charles Robinson, even referees in the NWA days. But to me, like Tommy Young, but to me, Earl Hebner's he was just the ref, right? He was the guy. His work back in WWE, he's just, every time that you saw Earl Hebner refereeing a match, or you saw that it was Earl Hebner refereeing a match, you knew that this was a big match, right? This was important, something big was going to happen. The way that he counted he has the master, to me, of the slow count. And what I mean is, it's not super slow. He'll do the 1, 2, and then that last 3 is so slow, but when he hits it just gets the biggest pop, right? Or he's really good at the 1, 2, the arm again is super slow. He's just going to get to the 3, someone kicks out. Kurt Angle was the best at the 2 3/4 or 8 9/10, whatever it is, kick out. He was just the best at that. So Earl Hebner being in TNA from 2006 to 2017 immediately, in my opinion, gave it serious credibility. Now, I know in maybe the casual fans, some casual fans that aren't as, wrestling diehards like you or I, may not see it like that. They might just go, oh, wasn't that the referee that used to be in WWE? But even that is important. Having just the recognition of an Earl Hebner and having that, knowing that he is the official, he is the greatest referee of all time, having him in your company led instant credibility, in my opinion, to TNA Wrestling. So his contribution to TNA Wrestling can't go unnoticed. As I mentioned, he was there for 11 years. So he contributed a big portion of his career and a big portion of his life to Impact Wrestling, and that also has to be factored in when it comes to this list. Why isn't he higher? And I don't want to say, because a referee isn't as important as a professional wrestler, because that isn't true. Maybe partially it is. Maybe I'm lying to myself there. But who really draws the money here? Is it Earl Hebner or is it the people in the ring? The referee will openly say that their job is to enhance the match and enhance the talents themselves, not for them to get over. Referees themselves shouldn't necessarily get over from trying to get over. They should get over from being a good referee. And I think that's the case with Earl Hebner. You didn't notice him unless you were meant to. If there was a story beat that he had to extenuate or anything like that, he could do it. His count was great. His mannerisms were great. If there was an angle that he could do it great. And the reason why he could do it so great is because, like I said, in my opinion, he's the greatest referee of all time. So he led instant credibility to Impact Wrestling. The reason I ranked him higher than Ken Shamrock was purely because he just was with the company longer. As I mentioned, Ken Shamrock was the initial and the inaugural world champion in the company's history, but he was gone pretty soon after that. He wasn't long for TNA. Whereas Earl Hebner, as I mentioned, whilst he is a referee and is a referee more important than the talent, I'll leave that for you to discuss in the comment section. Earl Hebner, just 11 years with the company, it can't go unnoticed. And he also had his son with the company too, Brian Hebner. So they had a huge impact on TNA in the mid-2000s and into the, what do you even call this, the 10s or anything like that? I guess we're in the early 20s now. But yeah, Earl Hebner comes in at rank number 7. Best referee of all time. You can't tell me otherwise. Earl Hebner is the greatest referee of all time. He's just, even now at his age, I think he is still refereeing. He refereed the Cody Rhodes versus Dustin Rhodes match, Double or Nothing 2019, didn't he? So if he wants to, he can dust off the old referee shirt and still go. So Earl Hebner here is ranked at number 7. Ranked at number 6, we have Team 3D, the only tag team inducted into the Impact Wrestling or TNA Hall of Fame at the time. They were inducted in 2014. Their accolades recognized by Impact Wrestling: 1-time NWA World Tag Team Champions, 2-time TNA World Tag Team Champions, 2-time IWGP Tag Team Champions, and recognized by Impact Wrestling as 23-time World Tag Team Champions overall. What's to be said about Team 3D? I think what's different here, and this was a difficult one where to put Team 3D here, because are they the greatest tag team in TNA history? That is a tough question. That is a really tough question. You got to remember, they were with Impact Wrestling for quite some time. as a tag team. They really were. Bully Ray and Devon subsequently split in TNA and became, I mean, in Bully Ray's case, became a 2-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion. Devon would go on to become a 2-time TNA Television Champion. So they did have single success in TNA too. But the important thing here is to talk about the tag team. They were inducted as a tag team, not as Bully Ray and Devon. Personally, I might be wrong here, but personally, if they'd have just inducted Bully Ray as a singles, he could potentially come up higher on the list here. But as a tag team, they're at 6. The reason I would say I had them at 6, because you've got to remember, the names in this Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame are legit, right? They are the best of the best that's ever appeared in Impact Wrestling or contributed to Impact Wrestling. Are Team 3D the best tag team in Impact Wrestling history? They're up there. They're up there. I would still say probably the likes of Beer Money were probably a better tag team at the time. You got to remember, Team 3D were not in their prime when they came to Impact Wrestling. When did they come to TNA? Like 2005, 2006 period of time? And they were with the company for a long time. Bully Ray eventually left Impact Wrestling in around 2015, finally, just before he went back to WWE. So they were there for nearly 10 years. Devon was slightly less than them because he'd left prior to that. And to be honest, the reason they split up in Impact Wrestling is because they did everything that they could do, right? They won the NWA World Tag Team Championship. They won the TNA World Tag Team Championship. Whilst they were with the company, they won the IWGP Tag Team Championships. At the time, there was nowhere else they could go that they hadn't won everything. They'd won the WWE World Tag Team Championships a million times. Obviously, they'd won it in ECW a million times. Whilst they were in WWE, they also won the WCW World Tag Team Championships. They had done it all. And I think that's important when you rank them in this list, that the TNA part of their career, even though they went back to WWE after the fact, to me, the TNA part of their career was the culmination of their whole career in terms of now they'd done everything that they could do, right, in North America. In North America, there was nothing left for them to do in terms of a mainstream stage and a main platform. Were they the best group in TNA history? Again, I would say no. I would say no because I think you've got to think of people like Beer Money, America's Most Wanted, that are probably, I mean, even a tag team like AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels were a tremendous tag team in TNA's history. Team 3D, were they better than them? Team 3D, like I said, weren't in their prime when they went to TNA in the first place, and they were still there for 10 years. And it was a strange process. Some of their matches in Impact Wrestling, TNA, were great. It goes back to the Earl Hebner principle as well, is that, and this will be a running theme here as we go through the list also, Team 3D added instant credibility to TNA when they joined. As I mentioned, they're the most decorated tag team in professional wrestling history. Signing them is a big deal regardless of if they were in their prime or not. I mean, I guess in their age, they would have technically, because they've just been around so long, you don't think that they're in their prime, but in their age, I suppose they might have been in their prime, but I just felt that they'd achieved the bulk of what they were intended to achieve in their professional wrestling career before they got to TNA, because once, even their last few years in WWE, it was kind of like, what more can they do, right? They'd been split up, they'd been moved back together because it wasn't the right time to split them up. But even in WWE at that point, it was, I mean, what more can the Dudleys do? Because they'd done it all. They had literally done it all. And that was the case in TNA. And I guess when they moved over to TNA, it was a fresh release on life. They had stuff to go after again, whether it was the NWA World Tag Team Championships when NWA was still affiliated with TNA, or whether it was the TNA World Tag Team Championships after that. But again, they achieved it all. They did it all. In terms of stature, are they the greatest tag team in TNA history? Well, it's pretty difficult to argue against that, right? In terms of stature, in terms of the most legendary tag team in Impact history, Team 3D are the top of that list. And I know the Road Warriors actually did a couple of appearances for TNA, but that was only 1 or 2. This is Team 3D for 10 years. So in terms of being the tag team of the most stature in Impact Wrestling TNA history, without a shadow of a doubt, are they the best tag team, in my opinion, in TNA and Impact Wrestling history? No. And again, I probably would rank maybe a Beer Money or an America's Most Wanted above them, because I think they were just more, I don't know, maybe that's just me enjoying their matches more, or me just thinking that they were better during that period of time in TNA. And that's me. Even someone like the Motor City Machine Guns, you can't discredit them for what they did for TNA at the time in terms of the matches. Team 3D's biggest contribution to the tag team division, in my opinion, at that period of time was credibility. They added huge credibility to the company and to the tag team division, and that can't be overlooked. And the longevity that they had with the company, again, can't be overlooked. That's why they're slightly higher than Ken Shamrock and Earl Hebner. They were with the company longer than Ken Shamrock, achieved more than Ken Shamrock. Again, Earl Hebner is no slight against referees, but the talent, in my opinion, should always be higher ranked in the list, in certain situations, of course. But I think Team 3D added more to Impact Wrestling than a Ken Shamrock or an Earl Hebner did, so they're ranked at number 6 for me. Ranked at number 5, it's the Monster Abyss, Chris Parks, Joseph Parks, whatever you want to call him. His accolades recognized by Impact Wrestling include a 1-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a 2-time TNA Television Champion, a 1-time TNA X Division Champion, a 2-time TNA World Tag Team Champion, a 1-time NWA World Tag Team Champion, and a 1-time Fight for the Right tournament winner in 2006. So why is Abyss ranked higher than the likes of Team 3D? His longevity with the company, right? I think anyone on this list, more than anyone, Chris Parks, Abyss, Joseph Parks, whatever, was a company guy. It's ironic that at the time of recording, he is no longer signed with Impact Wrestling. He's actually working for WWE as a producer behind the scenes. But Abyss, he sticked with the company for the entirety of his career, really, right? He could have gone to WWE several times and had several offers to go to WWE several times, to face the likes of The Undertaker, Kane, etc. And some people can argue that during his run with TNA, was he a hybrid of Mankind and Mick Foley with the multiple personalities and the mask and the thumbtacks? Yes. Was he a play on Kane with the mask? Yes. Did they play on the Kane and Undertaker storyline by having a half-brother storyline, which he had Judas Macias was his half-brother along with his father James Mitchell? Yes. So there were certainly, he was the Kane, Undertaker and Mick Foley of Impact Wrestling all rolled into one. Why he's higher than the likes of Ken Shamrock, Earl Hebner and Team 3D for me on this list? Again, it's his longevity with the company, but it's also his dedication to the company. When Abyss was announced as a Impact Wrestling Hall of Famer in 2018, universally everyone said, well, it's deserved, because he was, at the time, and again, the irony being that he is no longer with Impact Wrestling, but at the time he is almost Mr. Impact Wrestling, right? He was the only guy, and you think of the founders of the company and the people that started the company and the big names that came in and left and all of that sort of stuff, Abyss was the constant. He never left. He never left. He was a company guy, and he sacrificed his body several times in Impact Wrestling for the company. All his desire was to see the company succeed, and his contribution to Impact Wrestling can't go unnoticed. And what's interesting is on this list, every other person on this list has appeared for WWE, WCW, or whatever in their career, and is arguably most famous because of their appearances for WWE, WCW, ECW, whatever on this list. Abyss is the only name on this list in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame that only appeared for Impact Wrestling, made his name at Impact Wrestling, and stayed with Impact Wrestling. That's why he's in the Hall of Fame. That's why he's above Ken Shamrock, Earl Hebner, and Team 3D, because he was Mr. Impact Wrestling, right? That was him. Should he have had maybe a run with the TNA World Heavyweight Championship? I don't know, because at the time there were so many people ahead of him. When you think of Kurt Angle, Sting, etc., was he the right person to be champion at the time? Probably not. And as the years wore on, he became more of a veteran, a locker room leader, a producer backstage. He was a producer backstage for Impact Wrestling for the longest time. But also, the amazing thing to me about the Abyss character is you just look at the evolution of that character throughout his career in Impact Wrestling, and it is fascinating to see. It is absolutely fascinating to see. Whether it's starting off with James Mitchell, then like I mentioned, it's the half-brother thing with Judas Macias and James Mitchell. Then it's the feud with Sting. Then he's was he in an insane asylum? So he was in this insane outfit as he came out. Then you have Dr. Stevie. The less said about that, the better. Then he becomes a babyface with Hulk Hogan. He was TNA's top babyface, right, under Hulk Hogan. He even had Hulk Hogan's Hall of Fame ring for the longest time and came out to a version of Real American, which is mad. Then he becomes part of Immortal, turns heel, was walking around with Janice, that 2x4 with nails sticking out of it, and told him was big on 10-10-10. They are coming, right? Then you have Joseph Parks, his brother, looking for his brother, Chris Abyss, which was a tremendous character. Joseph Parks is one of my favourite characters in Impact Wrestling history. It's tremendous. If you don't know who Joseph Parks is, he was in storyline Abyss's brother, and Abyss went missing from Impact Wrestling television, and Joseph Parks was looking for his brother. Joseph Parks was an attorney at law as well. He came out to this almost like this soap opera sitcom 90s law music, which was great. And then the real reality would be that Joseph Parks was indeed Abyss. Abyss was just going through another sort of mental breakdown, and every time he would see blood, he would transform into Abyss, and eventually it was revealed that Abyss was Joseph Parks. Eventually, Abyss loses his mask to the likes of Eric Young, and then Abyss goes on also to be part of the Decay with Crazy Steve and Rosemary, and then they have the matches against the Broken Hardys in Impact Wrestling. You had Delete versus Decay, those tremendous stuff. There is just so much, isn't there, that Abyss has done in Impact Wrestling, and that's because his career with Impact Wrestling has been so long and he contributed so much to the company. It is a shame that he's no longer with the company, but he's in a role in WWE that I'm sure he's very, very, very happy with. Being a producer, being able to contribute to the WWE product, but he is a shoo-in for the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame. His place in this Hall of Fame is without question, because I would argue there's no person that has contributed more to Impact Wrestling more than Abyss. No one has. I said, even the people that founded the company, even the bigger names that we're going to get into on this list, nobody has contributed more to Abyss. And whilst maybe some should say, oh, should he be higher up on the list then? Maybe he is the only name on this list that is, an Impact Wrestling original that is in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame, which says a lot. But in terms of what he offered the company, I don't think it weighs as much as some other people that are on this list right now in terms of credibility, getting him to the next level. But in terms of his body of work, what he dedicated his whole career to the company, and that can't go untalked about and unseen. So rank 5 is Abyss, but it's hard. This is really hard to rank all these people. But number 5, we're going to go with Abyss. Number 4 is the icon Sting, the first name to be inducted into the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2012. His accolades recognized by Impact Wrestling. He's a one-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a 4-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion, and a one-time TNA World Tag Team Champion. Now, I know a lot of people might be surprised at this one. They're thinking, Sting, he was the first name inducted into the Hall of Fame. Should he be appearing higher on the list, higher than some other people that we're going to touch on in a minute? And there's an argument for that. Sting is one of the biggest names in Impact Wrestling history. He dedicated his WCW career to Impact Wrestling. He could have gone to WWE, and maybe he should have, looking back on it. Should he have gone to WWE sooner? I would argue yes. Did he dedicate too long to Impact Wrestling? Yes, I would say so. But his contributions, of course, to TNA go unrivaled. At the time, Sting going to TNA, initially I guess it was just a one-off, or it was going to be a couple of spots, wasn't it? It lasted a lot longer than that. It lasted, again, almost about 10 years that he was with the company for. And he was, at the time, before he went to WWE, he was the biggest name, right, in professional wrestling history, alive, because I think Bruiser Brody's on that list, but alive that hadn't gone to WWE, that was made somewhere else, was a huge global star that didn't go to WWE. And that was very important for TNA at the time to keep, wasn't it? It was important to have that name that wasn't a WWE name, even though it was an Impact Wrestling name. I've heard reports and rumors that Dixie Carter felt that Sting was a TNA name, not a WCW name, but a TNA name, which is, laughable. It's ludicrous. Sting was made in WCW and the Jim Crockett Promotions and the old NWA. That is Sting. That's where Steve Borden is from. So he wasn't a TNA name. But the important thing that he did to Impact Wrestling and to TNA is that Sting being on your roster just adds instant credibility. And the fact at the time that people would even have the discussion of Sting is choosing Impact Wrestling and choosing to stay in TNA over going to WWE, a place where he could maybe make more money, he could be on a bigger platform, and a place that he's never been before, but he chose to stay with Impact Wrestling. That speaks volumes and is partially responsible to the growth of the company in the early 2000s. I mean, you can't, or the mid 2000s rather, you can't look past that. Sting being a part of the company during that period of time facilitated the growth of getting on Spike TV, eventually trying to get to arenas, even though they didn't really sell many out, or live events or anything like that. But especially the Spike TV deals and the ratings on Spike TV, which now, if you look back on it now, right, if you were getting that kind of viewing figures now, you'd be like, that's great. I mean, they were like, was it 1.5 million? I believe the Hulk Hogan debut in 2010, whenever it was, January 3rd or 4th of 2010, actually got over 2 million viewers, which at the moment is just what SmackDown's doing. So go figure. Now, that Impact Wrestling or TNA did that at one time on Spike, so go look at that. But Sting's contributions to TNA are well up there, and there is a very good argument that maybe he should appear higher in this list, and maybe he should be considered even number one in this list, right? The question is, I think the names we're going to go into in a minute are slightly more deserving because I think their impact, pun included, I've used that pun like a million times so far, but their impact on Impact Wrestling and on TNA is just slightly more. As I mentioned, Sting's biggest thing, to me, Sting's biggest contribution to Impact Wrestling wasn't necessarily the feuds and the matches he has. And look, he had some great ones. I'm a big fan of the Sting versus Kurt Angle empty arena match they had in 2008. And that period of time, which did see a large growth of talent coming into TNA Wrestling and growth on Spike TV and growth in ratings on Spike TV, in my opinion, was kickstarted by people like Sting being with the company. Sting coming into the company in around 2005, 2006, I believe it was. Maybe it was even earlier than that. Him coming into the company got people's attention. What's this TNA? Like, I've heard some things about Impact Wrestling. Sting being with the company turned people's heads and got people's eyeballs on the product. It's without a shadow of a doubt. And not just necessarily the eyeballs of the fans watching at home and the fans on the internet at the time, but also the wrestlers in the industry. They then start looking at TNA as a place that I can actually go. It's a proper alternative to WWE. It's somewhere that I can go, I can make money, and I can still have good wrestling matches and perform on a stage that's a reasonable quality. In my opinion, you don't have maybe a Kurt Angle, Booker T, the names could roll off the tongue, couldn't they? All those ex-big WWE stars that came in, Christian Cage, etc., they all don't come in my opinion, if it isn't for Sting. That's just my opinion. I think certainly the likes of a Kurt Angle, I don't think comes in if it wasn't for a Sting, because once Sting's on your roster, especially at that period of time, he was a legend then and he was an icon then, but he could still go in the ring, and he still did go in the ring for 10 years. It turned a lot of people's heads, and a lot of people started to pay more attention to Impact Wrestling at the time. So I'm not going to say Sting put Impact Wrestling on the map by anything like that, because I think that goes down to the likes of AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, and those people too. Their contributions to Impact Wrestling can't go unnoticed too, and I'm sure at some point they absolutely should be in this Hall of Fame. But Sting definitely elevated the company, took the company to another level. Certainly got people talking about Impact Wrestling and TNA more than they were at the time, in my opinion. And like I said, those bigger names that were to come to TNA Wrestling, I think are because Sting goes there in the mid-2000s and people start to say, okay, this is a company that is trying to make some serious moves here. Is that a good thing or a bad thing that Sting being in the company facilitated those names to come in? That's maybe a discussion to have at a later time. But Sting's contribution to Impact Wrestling, it goes without saying. As I mentioned, Abyss, who's in number 5, was there because of all of that he did for Impact Wrestling. He was a career Impact Wrestling guy, but you just can't have Sting being lower than Abyss, in my opinion, because Sting takes Impact Wrestling and TNA to a next level. And Sting was partially, in my opinion, the reason that people started to really take Impact Wrestling and TNA seriously. So that's why Sting's at number 4 there. Again, super tough. These next 4, these 4 people are so interchangeable that they really could. There's an argument for each one being at the top of the list, in my opinion. So it's a really tough one. But yeah, we're going with Sting at number 4. At number 3, we're going with GAIL Kim. Yes, GAIL Kim was inducted into the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2016. She is the inaugural and 7-time TNA Knockouts champion, a 1-time TNA Knockouts Tag Team champion, and a 1-time Queen of the Knockouts winner in 2013. Some people might be opening their eyes a little bit here, saying, okay, why are we ranking GAIL Kim higher than Sting here? I think it's because whilst Sting obviously did take Impact Wrestling and TNA to a next level and certainly got more eyeballs on the product and all of that stuff, GAIL Kim's importance to a facet of Impact Wrestling, that being the Knockouts division and just women's wrestling in general, it has to be talked about, it has to be discussed. It's mentioned here, she's the inaugural Knockouts champion, a 7-time Knockouts champion, which I believe is the record in the company. Her work in Impact Wrestling is, I mean, it's up there with any talent, let alone gender here, let alone male or female. Her work in Impact Wrestling is just unparalleled. The matches that she had with Awesome Kong when they started to do the Knockouts division not only put that division on the map, the Knockouts division on the map, but also, in my opinion, helped put women's wrestling really on the map. At the time, the Knockouts division, their segments on TNA Impact were the highest rated segments of any part of the show. This is a show that has, at the time, Sting, Kurt Angle, Jeff Jarrett, AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, etc. All those big names, Booker T, you name it, they were on that show. And the segments involving GAIL Kim, Awesome Kong, ODB, etc., they were getting the highest rated segments on the show. Why? Because the matches were really good. The matches were really, really, really good. And when did the Knockouts Championship come into Impact Wrestling? Like 2006, 2007? So we're talking 13, 14 years ago, and women's wrestling is drawing then. Now fast forward to 2020, and women's wrestling's more popular and more revered than it's ever been in professional wrestling. But then that's why you have to look at someone like GAIL Kim, who was just a pioneer of that, absolutely a pioneer. And I think that's why I've ranked her higher than Sting in this instance, because, look, her contribution to the company as well, again, it goes without saying, yes, she went to WWE on 2 separate occasions, but every time she came back, her matches were great. Her contribution to women's wrestling, and this is almost broader, I guess, than TNA. I think her contributions just to women's wrestling in general, not necessarily TNA, not necessarily Impact Wrestling, not necessarily WWE. Her contribution to women's wrestling and what it is today, she's a pioneer because of it, and she's a pioneer for that Knockouts division being so great even to this day. I mean, you look at the Knockouts division in Impact Wrestling today. In my opinion, it's better than the AEW female division, without a doubt. I think it certainly holds up to the WWE women's division and the NXT women's division. I really do think that. Jordan Grace, the Virtuosa, Deonna Purrazzo, Taya Valkyrie, Su Yung, Rosemary, all of those names, I think, the Knockouts division is really, really Kylie Ray. Obviously, I forgot about Kylie Ray. The Knockouts division is really strong, and GAIL Kim still works with Impact Wrestling, I believe, as a producer backstage on the Knockouts matches in particular. And it just goes to show, because that division is still strong today. GAIL Kim put that Knockouts division on the map for the longest time. You'll remember this was a period of time as well when I was saying that the Knockouts matches were the highest rated matches on the show. This was at a time in WWE and any wrestling promotion in North America especially. Obviously, you had some promotions in Japan that were taking Joshi wrestling seriously at the time. But I think that at the time, TNA wrestling and Impact Wrestling were the leaders in female wrestling. I really do. And a big part of that is because of GAIL Kim. And I think maybe WWE started, hopefully, to see that female wrestling could be taken seriously, could draw, because that's what GAIL Kim and Awesome Kong did, because of people like GAIL Kim. And I know people might counter that argument to say, well, Lita and Trish Stratus, they main evented Raw way before that, way before the Knockouts Championship came in, which is true. But at the time they were still doing bikini contests, bra and panties, pillow fights, calling their people divas. And I know some people are going to say, well, TNA called them knockouts, which I guess that's a legitimate comeback there. It's a legitimate argument. But I just think for all, and again, people are going to say, why is Sting ranked lower than GAIL Kim? I just think for what GAIL Kim contributed, obviously, to the company in terms of being the woman in the Knockouts division, the pioneer of the Knockouts division. I just think if you look even past the company, what she did for female wrestling in general, in terms of getting people's eyeballs on female wrestling, getting people interested in female wrestling, showing that females could have great matches, showing that females could draw. People like her and Awesome Kong are just, their rivalry is mythic in TNA. If you haven't seen their matches, go back and watch them. They're unbelievable. They're so good. Even today, they are tremendous. So I think she's ranked at number 3 just because her contribution just not only to Impact Wrestling but the professional wrestling business as a whole, a wider whole, I think is unparalleled there. So Gail Kim is ranked at number 3 there for me. Ranked at number 2 is Kurt Angle, the second inductee into the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2013. His accolades recognized by Impact Wrestling. He's a 1-time IWGP Heavyweight Champion, 6-time TNA World Heavyweight Champion, 1-time TNA X Division, 2-time TNA World Tag Team Champion, and a 2-time King of the Mountain winner in 2007 and 2009. Kurt Angle has done it all in TNA, and I mentioned about Sting getting people's eyeballs to TNA. I think Kurt Angle is responsible for getting even more eyeballs to TNA. When Kurt Angle went to TNA in 2006, obviously he had a lot going on in his personal life when it comes to addiction, when it comes to his neck, etc. That's well documented. But at the time, Kurt Angle was the guy in WWE. I don't care what people say about John Cena and Batista at the time. And I know Kurt Angle was on ECW. The reason he was on ECW at the time in WWE and he wasn't as featured as John Cena and Batista is because he had a lot of problems. He had a lot of problems going on in his personal life when it comes to addiction, when it comes to injuries. But even then, his jump to Impact Wrestling, TNA, was shocking. It absolutely was shocking because a lot of people thought when Kurt Angle was released by WWE, he would be back. Give it 6 months, give it a year, he'll come back to WWE and it'll be Kurt Angle all over again. And he didn't. He went to TNA and instantly, like that, Kurt Angle jumped into Impact Wrestling to TNA, legitimized, for me, Impact Wrestling and TNA. Now, I know I mentioned earlier on in the video about Sting coming there and Sting doing the same thing and getting eyeballs on the product. I think with Sting being in Impact Wrestling at the time, certain people would have still looked at the company as, oh, okay, well, Sting's in TNA and he's an ex-WCW guy and he's getting on. Maybe that's just a place that, older guys go to or older wrestlers go to. And they go there, they get a good payday, but this isn't up to this isn't up to WWE standards. This isn't up to guys at the peak of their careers, on the biggest stage, doing the best matches for the biggest money, etc. And Kurt Angle really, in my opinion, changed that perspective. He absolutely changed that perspective with his jump to TNA. As soon as Kurt Angle jumped to TNA, suddenly for me, TNA and Impact Wrestling became a competitor to WWE. Now, obviously, they never were able to truly compete with WWE, far from it, actually. But Kurt Angle's jump to the company was just, it was such a shock and it was such a legitimizing moment for Impact Wrestling and TNA that it was huge. It was huge. And I mentioned his accolades there with TNA. He's done it all. A 6-time World Heavyweight Champion, which I believe is probably up there with AJ Styles as the most heavyweight championship runs in TNA. He won an X Division Championship, 2-time TNA World Tag Team Champion. At one point, he actually held every title. He had a feud, wasn't he, with Samoa Joe, and like a winner-take-all match, but for all the titles. So he was every champion in TNA and Impact Wrestling at the time. And the important thing to think of with Kurt Angle, and it is a bit of a mind-blowing thing when you think of him and his run, or his just career in general, I suppose. Everyone, and myself included, I consider Kurt Angle to be a WWE guy, right? Kurt Angle is most associated with WWE. His matches, his moments from his run in the 90s to the early 2000s, to the mid-2000s rather, he's a WWE guy. He's famous for being a WWE guy. He's now a WWE Hall of Famer, a WWE legend. Kurt Angle, you associated him with WWE because that's what everyone knows him by. But Kurt Angle spent more time in his career in TNA wrestling rather than WWE, which says a lot about his contribution to the company. Now, people will argue, well, that's because WWE wouldn't have him back because of his issues, and that is true. That is partially true. But also, you have to factor that Kurt Angle was very happy in TNA wrestling, very happy in Impact Wrestling. He won it all. He did it all. He was the guy. I know you had Sting in the company and people like AJ Styles, but Kurt Angle was just the guy. He was in his peak in Impact Wrestling 2 and TNA. That's a fact. Whilst he had these great matches and these great moments and great segments in WWE, he was only there for, 5 years, maybe? a bit longer than that, 6-7 years, maybe tops. Whereas in TNA Wrestling, he was there for nearly 10 years, and he was in his, not maybe his physical peak, but in terms of psychology, working matches, having great matches, he was at his peak in TNA Wrestling. He had his best matches, in my opinion, in his career in TNA Wrestling. His matches against the likes of AJ Styles and Samoa Joe are out of this world. Absolutely out of this world. If you have the chance to go back and watch him. And he was still competing in Impact Wrestling all the way to 2015 when he was facing the likes of EC3 still with the company. So he was, I mentioned about Abyss being a company guy, but so was Kurt Angle. And it goes to the same, I think, with Kurt Angle and Sting and Abyss, that there was this loyalty to the company, that they helped them through difficult times. They stayed with the company for a long time. They wanted to help them succeed and compete. And Kurt Angle, for me, appears higher on this list than a Sting, purely because, whilst I said I think Sting got a lot of eyeballs on the product, in my opinion, Kurt Angle just legitimized it for me. He legitimized TNA, he legitimized the company, and along with, as I mentioned, I don't think Kurt Angle comes to the company if Sting isn't there, but now that Kurt Angle was with the company, again, a lot of people start to say, actually, this is a company I can go to, this is a company I can work at, and this is a company I can make money. Again, was that a good thing or a bad thing with all of these ex-WWE guys coming in? But Kurt Angle never felt like that to me. Kurt Angle never felt like, oh, here's another WWE guy. Any stories that you hear about Kurt Angle working in Impact Wrestling and TNA will say that he was the first there, last to leave, worked his ass off in the ring, tried to make everything good, which at the time, considering people like Vince Russo was writing, it couldn't always be good. But Kurt Angle, he has to be considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest wrestler in TNA history, and that's including the likes of AJ Styles and Samoa Joe, just for what he did for that company. So Kurt Angle was 2 on the list, and the only reason he's not higher is, we'll touch on this in a second, but I don't think you can argue with the person that comes first in the rankings of the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame. Finally, number 1, the number 1 ranked person in Impact Wrestling's Hall of Fame is Jeff Jarrett. The co-founder of TNA, a 1-time AAA World Heavyweight Champion, 6-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, 1-time TNA King of the Mountain Champion, and 3-time King of the Mountain winner in 2004, 2006, and 2015. I mean, what more has to be said? I waxed lyrical just there, didn't I, about Kurt Angle, about him being the guy that legitimized TNA and took them to another level, similar to the way that Sting did. And the only reason that Kurt Angle isn't the number 1 ranked person in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame is because without Jeff Jarrett, there is no TNA Wrestling, right? There is no Impact Wrestling today. He is the co-founder of the company. You can't argue against it. Whatever your opinions of Jeff Jarrett may be, and especially in that latter run in, was it 2017 or wherever, where he was once again running things with Anthem there in Impact Wrestling. Regardless of all of that, he's Mr. TNA, right? He is Impact Wrestling. He is the reason that it's in existence today. Whatever your opinions are as to why that was, if it was WCW had gone out of business and WWE would never hire him, which is ironic considering at the time of recording he actually is back with WWE as a producer, as a backstage worker. Without him, there would be no TNA. It wouldn't. He was the founder of the company. He was he the biggest name at the time when it started? You know, probably not. And some people could argue that his run with the company initially, I mentioned there, a 6-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, was possibly because, was he booking himself to win? Probably, and you can't argue against that. But given the stars that were there at the time, it probably made the most sense. He was the one, especially that at that period of time, during those weekly NWA TNA pay-per-views, he was the one that was going to be there every week regardless, right? You got to remember, that's a period of time in which people were coming out of the company and coming in, going out, and only with the company for 1 week or a couple of shots here or there. Of all the legends that they had show up in the company, whether it was a Roddy Piper, Kurt Hennig, Road Warriors, whoever, Sean Waltman, all of those names, he was guaranteed to at least be the guy that was going to be there every week and could be confirmed that was going to be there at all. So I guess that's why he would be the world champion. And he was a big name. He was a big name and is a big name. He was a world champion in WCW. In my opinion, I would say he arguably became a bigger star in TNA wrestling, or certainly felt like more of a main eventer than he ever did. And obviously, he never got that main event push in WWE. In WCW, he did, but I don't know he ever truly felt like he was a proper main eventer in WCW. And in TNA, he did actually feel like a proper main eventer. Is that because he smashed himself over and over and over by having the World Championship over and over and over and over again and beating everyone? Maybe, but is that actually surprising in professional wrestling? You go to any territory where the booker is also a wrestler, they tend to book themselves to win. So you have to, in my opinion, ignore all of that. I think the most crucial thing when it comes to Jeff Jarrett, comes to his legacy in Impact Wrestling and TNA, isn't the negative connotations that come with it. Whether it is the Karen Angle situation, whether it is the rehab situation when he was with Anthem, all of that to me has to be ignored. And the thing you have to consider, and is the most important thing when it comes to Jeff Jarrett and his legacy with Impact Wrestling, with TNA, is that this company that is still going today, right? 18 years later, even though some people can't believe it's 18 years later, it is the cockroach that won't die. It's still going, and if anything, it's got more buzz about it than it has in a long time. The reason it is here today and here just in general is because Jeff Jarrett helped co-found it with his father Jerry Jarrett. So you can't overlook that. All of those names that I've spoken about in this Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame, whether it's Ken Shamrock, whether it's Earl Hebner, Team 3D, Abyss, Sting, Gail Kim, Kurt Angle, they've all contributed huge amounts to not only the professional wrestling business and huge amounts to TNA, whether it might be in Abyss's case his entire career, or if it's Kurt Angle, the majority of his career, or Sting, his post-WCW career, or Gail Kim putting the Knockouts division on the map, or Ken Shamrock becoming the first world champion in the company's history, or Team 3D legitimizing their tag team division. All of that is great, but it wouldn't happen if Jeff Jarrett didn't found the company. So he has to be number one. It's an easy decision. Some people will say, oh no, Kurt Angle should be number one, or Sting should be number one, or whatever. For me, it's a non-argument. It's a non-argument. It's cut and dry. Those other names, whether it is Sting, Kurt Angle, Gail Kim, Abyss, should those names be ranked higher or lower? That's up for you to discuss in the comment section. But I'd certainly say there's an argument for all of those names to be ranked higher or lower. But for Jeff Jarrett, he has to be number one. He can't be ranked for me any lower than that. Not necessarily of his work in TNA at the time, or his matches, his feuds, none of that whatsoever. Purely because without Jeff Jarrett, there is no Impact Wrestling, there is no TNA, and there is no Impact Hall of Fame, right? Because the company doesn't exist. So I know it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario, but Jeff Jarrett, he has to be ranked number one because without him, there's no Impact Wrestling and there's no TNA. So it's an easy one, not up for discussion. But as I mentioned before, this is just one man's opinion. It's my opinion only. What is your opinion? What are your thoughts on my rankings of the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame? How would you rank everyone in the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame? Put your rankings of each member of the Impact Wrestling Hall of Fame in the discussion box below. I'll be sure to comment with you and interact with you down there. I enjoy speaking to you all down there in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. They're on the screen right now. It's at 365Wrestle on Twitter and at WrestleNews365 on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming. What did you think? What are your rankings? Let me know, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.